You are listening to Level Up Your Gaming Podcast, Episode 14, House Rules. Today we talk about house rules in your games. We discuss two types of house rules, spoken and unspoken, and give examples of each. We also discuss how to create and implement your own house rules when you need them. If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you like the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, or tell a friend. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome into the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast. My name's Aaron, and in his home, back from Georgia, across from me, is Jared.
Hey, everybody. How you doing?
I'm sure you're happy to be home.
Extremely happy. I can say this to all of our listeners. Although I encourage everyone not to travel, I encourage everyone to stay in to protect people who are at risk. For those of you traveling, it is not as scary as you might think it might be. Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. Just remember to use safety precautions, keep your social distance, stuff like that. Just do the smart thing to protect others in the event that you don't know you're carrying. So
exactly. That's good word of advice here for everybody who's listening to the podcast, especially if you're in in the U.S. and we're trying to get things tamped down here and trying to make sure everyone's staying healthy and safe. So also trying to give you some entertainment in these slightly bleak times.
a couple of laughs, just one or two, being like, "Oh, that Jared and Aaron." Oh, those crazy kooks.
What are they gonna do next? But today,
what are we doing next?
Exactly. Well, I'm going to introduce that. Today, we're talking about house rules in your games in particular, and kind of your application of house rules. And
my favorite topics.
The first thing that I think about when I think about house rules is I always think about the golden rule.
Do unto others as you would do unto yourself.
Yes and no, but the golden rule in all the books is these are guidelines and not set in stone. Meaning, if you don't like source material that was given to you in Dungeons and Dragons, you don't have to use it. You can make up your own world. Okay, you can change things about stories. You can change things about modules. You can change things in the lore. It's very important to understand that if you don't like how a rule is applied because it just doesn't make sense, and a good example of this is I guess fall damage in D&D is easy to survive with a very tanky character, and you can basically fall from any height and survive. So for example, if that doesn't seem to jive with you or your expectations of the world, don't let it. You don't have to follow it because it's a rule.
And it's so important to have these house rules. When establishing lore, just make sure with those golden rules when you're setting up your game. Let's say you're doing a Serenity-based game, and the Alliance is not going to be called the Alliance. You've got, say you want to call them, I don't know, the Directorship or the Colonial Authoritarian Government, whatever you want to call them. I highly recommend informing your players thereof before you start the game if you're going to do those major changes to the world. I myself, for example, with Werewolf the Apocalypse, I've always been more a fan of a werewolf than I have been a vampire. The one thing that I couldn't stand about werewolves was essentially they are eco-terrorists. And the whole, we do this for Mother Earth always irked me. And now that we've started this big change in our games that started almost 2 years ago. 2 years ago. I think we asked this every time.
2 or 3. Yeah, it was. I think it was about 3 years ago. I remember when we started. I think it was around 2016.
Okay. I said werewolves. I'm turning into the hulking beasts of destruction. That they are not going to be eco-terrorists. And unfortunately for my friends, they have yet to see what I've turned the werewolf into, but they will be seeing that very soon, so they can implement it in their games.
Well, yeah. So essentially, all we did is we took the rules of the World of Darkness, old World of Darkness. If you're playing New World of Darkness, I don't really know what those rules are, but we took the old World of Darkness rules and we said, we've played werewolf and vampire. We're not getting any new material about them, so they're not changing them fundamentally. Let's Jared's idea was to create kind of his own world because each subset has some idea of what the other races are in the world, and none of them jive correctly with the other races. Like they're horribly imbalanced if you actually play the same things in the exact same world. So I like the idea of what we ended up choosing to do here, which is kind of just say, well, here are the base rules. We know how to play the game. Let's just create our own lore around the background. So that's one example of a good house rule there, which is change the lore. So
Change the lore. So pretty much there are, in my personal opinion, there are two large categories of house rules. There are unspoken house rules, which aren't laid out. You don't write them down. They're just unspoken house rules. A perfect example of unspoken house rules for our games is tie goes to the runner. Yet another baseball reference to a group of guys who don't really watch baseball. But essentially what we say is if there is a tie, the attacker is always does not win. It is the defender who wins the tie. So sometimes that's a little bit difficult to discern because, like, I am attempting to stealth through past the security guard. The security guard is attempting to see me. Which one of those is the attacker? Which one is the defender? In those circumstances, I go with really who's initiating the action. So for example, if I'm trying to sneak past a guard, I said I'm trying to sneak past him. That makes me the one who's initiating the action. The guards trying to detect me is the passive side. So that's really, he's the defender in that situation. So maybe you have a house rule like that. Ties go to, whatever. But that's a great unspoken rule that we have always had in our games, probably since we were like 10, 12. It's just the tie goes to the runner.
obviously you play a D20 system. You probably don't have that scenario because we're not rolling against each other. But in the D10 system, the tie goes to the runner is something we had to establish pretty early on because very frequently you'll end up with the same matching dice pool. So you'll end up being like, oh, we both had the same number of successes. Who wins? And so you keep rolling, or you say the defender always wins. And usually, if you're like who's the defender, you're like, well, I'm doing this, he's doing that, and then it's pretty easy for the GM to just have the final word. So another house rule: GM has the final word.
GM has the final word. He is the arbitrator of the game, and is the one who makes those decisions. A house rule. It's nothing established in the books. It is a house rule that you will need to form. That the GM is the final arbitrator. Sometimes that does get a little hairy. Now, explicit rules are ones that you needed to write down, and generally they're reserved for systems and more complicated things. For example, we really built our own because as you all know, we're doing a game that centers around detective work, and interrogation isn't really well covered in the White Wolf system. It simply isn't. So what I went through is I went through several books, and I developed a set of rules, and we have been using those, and those are explicit house rules. I can't expect, say I go over to, or say Aaron goes over to our friend Josh's house and plays the game. He can't expect Josh to have the exact same rules when it comes down to interrogation. It's a house rule, and when he's visiting other games, he can't expect anyone to follow those. He can always bring them up and inform them about it because Josh might find it helpful. Might be like, man, I don't have a good interrogation system. Let me borrow that. And that's where even your own house rules can spread cross state lines. Looking at exactly. You, North Carolina. Looking at you. This week's shout out, North Carolina.
But yeah, no, you could have those spread across state lines. You could bring them to other places, but you really develop the system house rules when you don't have a good rule set for that particular action. So like Jared said, the interrogation or the investigation part of it, it can't be the same role every time, because what you might be trying to do is you might be trying to coerce someone, you might be trying to lie to someone, you might be trying to appeal to their empathy. Those are all different things. Or you might be trying to see if they're lying. Like, are you really good at detecting lies? Can you perceive these different things, or can you perceive their emotion? Things like that. So that's why we ended up creating those house rules in general. I think that you're gonna find the need to do that in many different systems. Or, like I said, you're gonna read something like chase rules, okay, and you're gonna
Oh
go,
yeah, Chase.
this works, I guess, but how do you make the chase seem more exciting? I guess is a good way to put it. Um, you
Action
know,
packed,
Action
engaging.
packed. How do you get to the point of the capture and what you end up doing there in the chase rules themselves? You don't want to. Part of the house rules is trying to make things feel more exciting or more involved than just rolling dice sometimes. So
Absolutely. So yeah, and system rules are the first ones that I kind of wanted to cover. So system rules again are built when you don't have very good rules in the book that cover certain things that you want to get involved in. Um, one of my things. Please go through your books, especially White Wolf's scattered skills across multiple books. So you find a group in one. You find the rules for poison in one book, but you can't find the rules for poison in another. Look into those. Try to find those. Dig in, and we'll get in more of that and how you build, how you actually build house rules. The second set of house rules is a little bit more complex. It's morality. So, for example, a great example is the detective game that we are currently doing. We made a group decision that we were going to play the good guys, the heroes of the story. That implies a morality that's above par. That's that. Nobody's going to be shooting anyone. That doesn't shoot first. There's a lot of rules and a lot of them are very unspoken. So morality, things that you will have and not have in your game. For example, and this is a great conversation to have as a group, maybe where everyone's just thinking about what game they want to do, a get together when you guys are going to just watch a movie or whatever, and you want to have a discussion before that. Morality in games is fantastic because, like, for example, I myself, if someone wants to play a character who will engage often in sexual assault, that's not going to happen in my game. No, that's just not going to fly. That is a moral boundary that I will not, even if it is a miraculous or very in-depth villain concept, right? I'm not going to bring that into my game. It's just that's a level of evil that I'm not particularly giddy to jump and dive into. It's a morality thing. If you have a character who's like, I enjoy, hunting down people like they're the world's most dangerous game, that's morality I'm not interested in engaging in, for this game session. Even if I did a villains game, I wouldn't be interested in it. Maybe down the line somewhere, because dangerous game, yeah, unless you're the prey, I don't think I'm gonna get in that.
yeah, I mean, you gotta go. I mean, I would have people go back and listen to the very first episode, The Gathering, and go back and listen to Heroes and Villains when you speak about morality and kind of what you're choosing here for morality. But a lot of these things where you try to set up, the base rules for your game in terms of morality, you set those up in session 0. So you want to make sure that everybody's on board with with what you're doing from the get-go, and nobody's surprised or like what? And I thought we were able to do that in this game. Like, you just want to make sure people know, up front, hey, I'm not okay telling stories about satanic rituals and things like that. Like,
And that's the thing. Like, I myself, as many of our listeners know, I'm a Catholic. I have the idea of demons and hell and Satan scares the shit out of me. It really gets under my skin. I just don't think you should play around with things that, in my belief, are real. So it's a house rule that, and I really thank Aaron and Ken and Brian for never trying to broach that subject. They've really very much respected my house rule of no Satan involved. Let's not get into the icky of Satanism. It's just it gets under my skin a little bit, and those are morality house rules. Where are we going as a group, and how is everyone going to? Because remember the golden rule they say in White Wolf is change. Everything's flexible. I said the gold. If you got two golden rules, one is everything's flexible. Two is everyone's supposed to be having fun.
so we always keep saying everybody needs to be having fun.
Everyone needs to be enjoying the moment, even though there are stressful moments and bad times in the game. The hero's journey has to have a dip, but at the same regard, you don't need to make your players uncomfortable. If you know that one of your players, because I myself have dealt with players in the LARPing community who were very edgy about things like they wanted to tell stories and create scenes that involved sexual assault, and I was not cool with that. Just not cool with that at all, and I had to excuse myself. Like, you guys can tell that story. I'm not going to be a part of that. And my storyteller didn't see that. They didn't. Well, they were there for it, but they didn't realize that, hey, maybe some of my players are going down a morality trail that I shouldn't allow in the game, because it makes my other players not have a good time. It's an important thing to have. So the last type of house rule is player interaction that I wanted to go over. So how do you allow your players to interact with one another? Tensions get high sometimes. Maybe somebody had my players are not allowed to yell at one another. Like, even if they do something in game. And one of the previous storytellers, that I guess I was a player under, man, he would just let people get into roaring arguments. I mean, doors slamming and shit like that. That's just not something I want in my house.
Yeah, again, if you're getting to that point of a game, you got to be really careful of, are you just bringing up conflict and tension between your players for the sake of enjoyment, that more so than it is.
I think this was in our don'ts episode where we talked about don't make conflict between your players, but he loved it. He loved party on PvP nonsense. He loved it, relished it, and didn't realize that player interactions, if I welcomed a new person in, a house rule, an unspoken house rule, let's say one character wants to call another character an idiot. All I would ask my players to do is say, my character is saying to your character that he's an idiot. Why? Because some people can't divide the line. And we're going to get into this. I think we have an episode planned about at a game, in-game talk, and what do you allow. Somebody can misinterpret, I look at Aaron and go, I'm in character, and Aaron's supposed to be in character, but I look at him and go, you're an idiot. Aaron might think that Jared is calling him an idiot. No, yes. My character is calling your character an idiot. So house rules, if you're going to say something insulting to another player or another character, just make it very clear. This is a house rule that I use. Just make it very clear that it's a character talking to a character, not a player talking to a player. Those interactions need to be monitored, and there need to be house rules. it's interesting. One of my house rules that I've kind of developed over the years as we've gotten older. Um, I have no problem with my players drinking during game. You know, having a beer or two. I ask my players not to get fucked up during my games. We've had it.
It really if you enjoy drinking, you know, at your games and you think it just is the bee's knees and everybody does it when they're gaming, have at you. But for the most part, and I again every time I tell this to somebody who's like so what do you guys do? You guys go grab like a bunch of beer and get together and drink? I'm like, no, actually we're completely sober when we do this. Like um, yeah, people always look at me weird when I say that, and I'm like, well, the enjoyment is, you know, playing the game. It's not drinking beers with my friends. Like those are two separate activities that I enjoy, but I enjoy playing the game because I get to immerse in the game and I get to play the game. So I've always found that when you start drinking, obviously it lowers your inhibitions, it does things to you, and the game you might loosen you up a little bit in the game, but it also makes it easier where if maybe you're having a problem with Steve down the line there, and you yell at Steve and you're like, "Fuck you, Steve," and
Exactly. Alcohol in games, I found it is a slight mix. It's really a balance. So that's a house rule that you might look at. Just like, hey guys, I don't mind a beer or two. But like all I'm asking is don't get fucked up. Because when you get fucked up, you know you got the one guy, the storyteller's trying to do the scene, and he's just like, and I'll take another one, like, and screaming out weird things, and it just completely ruins the atmosphere, especially if you're doing a scary story and somebody's drunk. Oh my god, that's just that's just painful. That is just
nothing's worse in a scary story than somebody, you know, cracking a joke or doing something that ruins the tension of the scene. Like, especially if you got people on like the edge of the seat, and if you have some drunk guy in your gaming room, they're for sure gonna like fart or something and be like, "Yeah, let her rip," or yeah.
exactly, and it's like, so, again, because I'm pretty sure, I think Brian usually has like one or two beers during game.
Brian has become more accustomed to drinking a couple of beers while he's been doing game.
And it's just like, and he's perfectly fine. He has one or two, and that's it. I think Ken also does. When we're remote gaming, he'll have
Yeah, when
like
we're
one or
remote
two.
gaming, Ken he has a couple beers.
Because you can't really drink beer in my house because I don't have any.
We have to bring it there if we want to do it. But I don't. Also, I don't come there to drink beer. I come there to
Exactly.
play game.
I come to game. So there's some house rules that are great, that are player interaction. Aaron and Ken use one thing that I'm not quite sure where they picked it up from, and so please feel free to fill me in. They use hand symbols to generate out of game, in game talk,
That's the
which
that's the LARP hand symbol.
I know, but I never used it.
You no, yes, you did. We had the book that had the rules for the LARP thing. Remember, like the incognito with like the upside down monocle and.
I do, but like you guys use it fluently, and I'm like, I've
Well,
never employed
Ken
that.
always uses it. So the crossed fingers at your shoulder means I am talking out of game.
Right.
Okay. I don't necessarily always do that. I try to make it apparent that I'm doing that. But I will just blurt crap out and then have to like immediately follow it with like that was out of game, that was out of game.
And we're gonna get into the talking in at a game, in game stuff, because that's a fine line. That is such a fine line.
It's a
We
very
can do it.
fine line.
Oh
We
my
actually have an
god.
episode about table talk, but that is a house rule, defining what you want to have as your table talk, and like that's why we want to have a whole episode on it because it is so fine. Like, what do you, Yana? What are you admitting into court? Like,
Yeah.
are we admitting this evidence or not? Like,
So in the final player interaction rule that I want to discuss with our listeners is, really it's uh, technology use during game. of which I am guilty. I love writing stories. Aaron, Ken, Brian have all had to put up with me on my computer typing out the next game while they're storytelling. And I have worked hard for the last several games to not do that.
You've gotten a lot better at not doing it, or at least doing it in more moderation, to the point that I always feel like you're more engaged in the game. Because if you're on your phone and you're not paying attention, and if you don't have a rule like that, like, hey guys, put away your phones, it is so easy for you just to miss entire swaths of dialogue. If you're doing an investigation game like we're doing, I mean, you're just missing major plot points because you're not there. You're buried in whatever else you're doing there, and it's so tough on the GM. And then the GM starts feeling bad because they're sitting there going, "Am I not doing enough to engage my players?"
Exactly. You got your GM triple guessing. Now, I'm not saying ignore texts from your wife or your kids. I'm not saying those kind of technology rules, but like someone having, a video game open during game is demoralizing as a storyteller. Me, I don't have such rules at my table because like I understand that when you're not engaged in a scene, it can get a little boring, and also because I'm a horrible example to follow. Jared always is on his laptop, but everyone also knows that Jared multitasks like a son of a bitch. Like
I've heard about how you watch movies with your wife. So
every movie I have to have my laptop on and doing something else. I mean, it's just I need more stimulation than a movie can offer me. And generally, what am I doing? I'm writing game stuff. I'm doing my maintenance. I'm doing all that stuff. But what I encourage you guys to do is sit down with your players, especially if you know your table. This is the modern era, and especially if your guys are coming up, just starting. Please discuss that with your players because it can really hurt you as a storyteller when you look around your table, you're telling a scene, and 4 out of 5 people are on their phones and they're texting or they're going through Facebook, and so you can to be on some apps, like please don't be on Facebook while I'm storytelling. Please don't be on Instagram, social media, unless you're doing something for the game, like, oh, I'm Facebooking that Friday night game, and that's why I'm taking a picture of the board and stuff like that, because that can be cool just to tell their friends. But like, don't be sitting there private chatting with somebody while you're doing it. If the girlfriend sends you a text, answer back on the text, or excuse yourself from the table while you're doing it. Because it can be so demoralizing. It can just be so demoralizing, and that's why I'm working very, very hard not to do it anymore. It's a conscious effort. So when you do ask your players, realize for many of them it's going to be a conscious effort. So it's never bad to say thank you or whatever, because some people now growing up in the digital age, that's what they're used to. They're on Facebook during business meetings.
So you have a personal computer attached to your hip at all times. I mean, they literally are personal computers at this point, and it's just very, very easy to get wrapped up in it, especially if you're not immediately engaging with the table. Again, super important. Like I said, go back, listen to the Gathering episodes, the very first episode we did. We talk about the session zero there. It is so important to have these session zeros and establish some ground rules. It's also a good place to establish house rules. If you're going to do something different in a game that you've never done before, very important to say it up front at the start of the game. Don't like say, well, I'm not going to repeat myself to my players anymore in game because I don't like that they're on their phones, and then not have informed them of that before it starts happening, because boy, will you see a revolt. Like, make sure when you do a house rule, like I said, you gotta, even an unspoken house rule started with a spoken house rule, which is we all figured out how to sort of do it through playing the game, and we just sort of adapted it. But if you're going to make it become an unspoken house rule, you better speak about it first, and everybody understands what you're trying to do, up front in the game.
And it's oh my god, that is required, because I've seen the passive aggressive storyteller. Fortunately for me, under LARP, I experienced a lot of different storytelling. God, I've literally have been there during the rule. Like, they're like, oh, if two gamers are talking to each other, I'm not going to repeat myself. And we were like, I was literally quite asking him, like a rule lookup, or can you look up my stats for this gift? And I've had the storyteller that passively aggressively is like, I'm not repeating myself. And I was like, you're not what? Like, when did this start? Don't do that to your players. Don't put in passive aggressive house rules. Just be upfront. And that's where I kind of come into rule development. So breaking away from more of the morality and interactive or interpersonal rules of your house, back down to system. How do I build a system? Because I love to leave you guys and gals with tools. So here's how I develop a system rule. First, there's the situation where we become aware, right? My players have captured the bad guy's henchmen. They are heroes, so they will not resort to physical torture. So what do? They need to interrogate the FBI, the police, all of our men and women in law enforcement. They 99.9% of the time do not resort to any physical action to get a person to confess. Interrogation's key. So my players, they're going to interrogate this person. And you're like, oh crap, I don't have any rules for this. Let's say I'm pretty confident that Star Wars doesn't have interrogation. Is that one of the skills in Star Wars, interrogation?
It may have interrogation rules. It may have investigation rules. Because there are investigation roles. So I mean, like even in White Wolf, there are investigation roles. But it's more about the combination of. So in White Wolf, it's the combination of a natural latent attribute that you have plus a skill that you have that generates the role itself. And then in the D20 systems, they all have a set of skills that you have, and they all have modifiers based upon your natural latent attributes. So I don't know if they have like an investigation role or something like that, but you might have. There definitely is a not a persuasion roll, perception roll that you have. So maybe you roll that if you don't have an investigation roll on the sheet.
Right. So we're about to interrogate this person. You get up with your Star Wars book. You're a Jedi. You're not going to resort to torture, but you're going to threaten them with your lightsaber and stuff like that. But you open up the book. There's no rule. This is when you become aware of the gap. It's where you become aware of the system not having something you need. At that point, what I will do is I will determine what skill best relates to that action. So, for example, if there is a persuasion skill in Star Wars, roll your persuasion skill. Roll your whatever skill, gather information skill. I know gather information is one of them. And for that moment, I will announce. I will make an announcement. I will announce that we're just going to do this for tonight. This is how it's going to work for the night. And I will come up with something later. So we make that roll, successful or unsuccessful, and eventually, let's say they get it and we move on. At the end of the night, I'm going to make sure to make a note for during my maintenance period of when I'm working on my game, during the week, prepping for next week's game. During my maintenance period, I need to create a rule for this. So what I will do is I will go to the great World Wide Web, right? I will look up everything I can on interrogation rules D20, because you never know if there's another system out there that uses D20. And that's why I always encourage you to type in the system. So you might type in storyteller system, for if you're doing a World of Darkness game. D20 system if you're doing Star Wars. Cortex, I believe, is Serenity. And then, like GURPS has everything. GURPS, they just, God bless them. They're like, yeah, let's make a book for riding dinosaurs. Dino Riders. God bless GURPS. Like, they're just like, man, we'll think of anything. So find out what others have done. Okay. Don't try recreating the wheel if you don't have to. You might go to the first page and it might be like rules for interrogating an orc. And it might have the layout rules from some obscure book from from Wizards of the Coast. And bam, they've got a system in place and ready to go. You can look at that system. Does it work for your team? Does the character sheet have applicable skills? So you might go, oh man, it does say here that on the Greyhawk system, you do have an interrogation skill. Well, let's make that just adjust the skill, change it to persuasion. And so find out what others have done. You might have to mix and mash, or you might have to go through several systems, or you might just find one right off the bang that you love and it works for the game. Then I type it up, and I generally keep a good hefty file on all of our house rules. So I type it up, and the last step is the next game session. I'm going to present it, and I'm going to get the consent of the governed. I'm going to get my players to either agree to the rule, or they might be like, and I might have to take it back to the drawing board with their input. Generally, you need that consent of everyone being like, yeah, that's great, that's perfect. And so I make sure that it's in a location that's accessible. We use Google Drive. Make sure that it's accessible to everyone for the future reference. So that is literally how I make a systems house rule.
That's actually a perfect example of the good point to wrap up there on, which is the consent of the governed, that's how all the house rules are. Okay, you need to have the consent of the table. You can't just make house rules in there. And what I do, and I'm the master of everything here at this table. Make sure that everybody else is on board with those rules, because again, the main point is to have fun while you play these games, and you're not going to have fun if not everybody is on board with the house rules that you establish. But anyways, you have anything else on this subject here, Jared?
No, I'm good. I think we covered it all.
All right. Well, if you have any house rules that you'd like to share with us, or any comments or thoughts about what you think about house rules, go ahead and hit us up at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com. We're also happy to take any suggestions on any episodes you'd like to hear about. But go ahead and tell a friend about this crazy time right now. You probably have a lot of downtime as well. Hopefully you're doing well in this time, and we hope that our listeners are doing good. But stay in, be safe, and share the podcast. But anyways, guys, shameless plug. Also, level up your gaming, because I don't think we mentioned it, and we have to mention it.
We got to mention it. Level up that gaming.
Level up that game. And we hope that we can bring you some joy here in this time. But for Jared, I'm Aaron. Have a good week, guys.
Have a good week, everyone.